What we're really trying to do now is go around to different folks who are critical and get parents' point of view, board point of view, funders' point of view, because we're going to wrap that context around this archive.
That's great. I mean, maybe there's something you can distill from it for, I mean, I don't know what kids coming into college now who are deaf, I don't know what the experience for deaf children is growing up now compared to when Jacob grew up,
Yeah.
But, what we did encounter was some parents incredibly fraught with anxiety, okay?
Worry.
And, worry, and the anxiety led them to, there was one couple, they had to do signed exact English, and you remember that? Some people came in, they were literally made sick by seeing kids sign. It was so alien to them, okay? Now, maybe that's not the same now, and it had less to do with the opportunities for the child and more to do with where they were coming from.
Well,
so
I was going to say, you made a very pressing comment, which I think is, you got to find your own center.
Yeah.
And if your center is that you can't accept your deaf child, you got trouble.
Oh yeah,
and for a lot of people, that's hard.
I have 2 daughters who are great, and I have the best son I could ever have. So deaf hearing just doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter, right? And that's a mental set.
Yeah.
And before, I think, as we look back, there was a lot more deafness as an abnormality, as opposed to deafness as one of the natural human conditions.
Yeah, and I think culturally, when you look at autism and other things that afflict kids, there's so much more acceptance of it now. There's social acceptance. It's just sort of easier to get out there. But I mean, emotionally, it's still difficult. Everybody thinks their life's going to go one way and then it goes another. But as I said, Jacob's the child I always wanted. He couldn't be a better child. It just never made a difference to me.
Well, our son Jason is hearing.
Yeah.
But he's a special child.
Oh, yeah.
And we found this out because his IQ was like 150 and 160.
Cool.
And as a result, it was as difficult to raise Jason in the school system as it was to look at some of the kids who are quote-unquote mentally challenged.
Yeah.
Because if you are major different in any way...
Where did he grow up?
Rochester.
Oh, yeah, and where is he now?
He's a faculty member at University of Alabama, Tuscaloosa, in the anthropology department, and he's doing stress and nutrition and its effect on the immune system.
Right.
But we struggled with him for the same reasons. There is an isolation component. When you're like that, it's really hard for people to relate to you,
Yeah, I completely understand that. And also there's less awareness of it back then.
Tell me about what you were thinking when you realized your son was deaf and you weren't going to be able to raise him to the educational system as it currently existed.
Well, we'd started our own company to produce documentaries. We were pretty entrepreneurial. So the idea that there was no institution that would help him was really not daunting. It just seemed organic to just start our own. It was also part of the generation that I was part of. So it just seemed, okay, well, we'll start it. You didn't give it a second thought if what you need isn't here.
You've been generous to provide the entire tripod archive, National Technical Institute for the Deaf, and it now resides in our American Sign Language and Deaf Studies Community Center at RIT. I'd like to ask you a few questions about the program because you were one of the key movers and shakers in the program. Why? What led you to that?
Well, I had a son who was diagnosed as profoundly deaf when he was about 8 or 9 months old. And as soon as I found out, and I was shocked, I didn't know anything about deafness, and I didn't know any deaf people. So as soon as I found out, I started exploring options and how do you parent a deaf child, and met a lot of deaf adults. And in the course of it, I got all kinds of conflicting advice. This was in 1980, and the oralism versus total communication versus auditory verbal debate was raging. And I was in Los Angeles, and every alternative was kind of
It's really a hotbed,
represented.
yeah.
So as a parent, of a young baby, it was confusing to me. So I decided that we had to set up a kind of a hotline for other parents so that they wouldn't have to go through the same
Struggle
trauma
as you
and
did,
struggle. Right. And so at the time I was married to Michael Schamberg, and he and I and a couple of friends got together and decided to establish the hotline, and we called it the Grapevine. And I brought in Carl Kirschner, who at the time had just returned to Southern California from Gallaudet. And I said, well, what should we call this? And he said, let's call it Tripod, because he, in the 70s, had done a lot of workshops around the country for parents of deaf children. And it was really the first time that parents of deaf children were given a voice in how to educate their child. So he said, we already have parents around the country who were part of Tripod 10 years ago, and they can help with this hotline. And we were trying to answer questions for parents like, where can I find a dentist in Des Moines who signs? Or, simple questions like that. Or, my 4-year-old deaf child isn't reading. Okay. So then when my son Jacob became old enough for school, and I went, okay, time for school. And I started looking at schools, and I went, no.
So there was no model out there that did what you felt needed to be done.
There was nothing.
Schools for the deaf, oral schools, etc.
No.
Nothing satisfied you and Michael.
No. I really searched.